Hello and good day, and welcome to Indie Practices webinar in partnership with the Medical Association of Georgia. Today we're going to present some OIG compliance updates and also 2024 HIPAA updates and some services associated with both of those. Our first speaker today, first presenter, is Stephen Maloney. And Stephen is the Chief Operating Officer of VinOps, which is an OIG exclusion and sanction screening company, and has been in business doing this since 2016 with over 1,000 registered practices currently. Stephen, I'm going to now give you the dashboard and give you the screen.
Thank you.
All yours.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm just going to talk to you today with a nice overview of what's expected and along with the background as far as OIG exclusion and sanction screening is concerned. Topics for today: why people care about OIG exclusion compliance, the effect of an exclusion. So what happens when an exclusion is handed down by any particular agency, who to screen and when to screen. Typically, one of the biggest questions we tend to get is who to screen, and people understand that it needs to be done often, but what exactly does that mean? The next topic on today's agenda here, civil monetary penalties. What typically is expected if an exclusion is ever found. For example, establishing a screening process. I have a good slide that will give a nice overview on how to really establish a good screening process internally and how other considerations to think about. And finally, a few recent enforcement examples. These enforcement examples are very common. OIG does publish a bunch of them, so we can look at a few of those. First thing down there at the bottom, this is taken directly from the OIG's website. I like to start with this typically. What is the regulatory basis for screening? So it is the Social Security Act, Section 1128, and that in Section 1156 of the Act as well to sort of round it out. All easily available online for your review, but that's the regulatory basis. What does that mean in the end? Anyone who hires an individual or entity on the LEIE may be subject to civil monetary penalties. Now, why people care about OIG compliance? First of all, I want to say it has a ripple effect. It addresses multiple points of a compliance program. Those points, it's one of the 7 basic elements of an effective compliance program. Screening mitigates the overall risk rating for any program, your risk of fraudulent claims, your risk of hiring bad actors. It maximizes your resources, in particular when you utilize a third party, for example. Your resources are maximized. Your time spent with this apparently small corner of your compliance program, but however many find the time to manage it is a lot greater than initially assessed. Is minimized, excuse me, resources are maximized for time by using, for example, a third party. HR is also affected. That being said, only because it works so closely to get this managed. HR is a big part of that process. If not compliance, then HR typically gets handed this. So all of these things help to mitigate and help all those resources be used wisely. Leverages tech wisely as well. You couldn't do this without some good tech. And we won't really even touch on AI as far as where that kind of tends to bleed in a little bit. Next bullet point, maintains a better state of audit or investigation readiness. The main point for screening is that you want to make sure you're not hiring any bad actors, but second to that, and really in many respects just as critical, you have to have that record of screening. That's going to be the first thing that one of the first things that you get asked for in the event of an audit. Screening is going to guard your reputation. It's going to meet the attestation requirements for participation in multiple programs, and it also, it reduces the C&P liability. What is the effect of an exclusion? Just to reiterate the overall statements I hit earlier, no federal health care program payment can be made for any items or services furnished by the excluded person. But additionally, you can define as follows. You can't have it by or furnished by anyone who employs or contracts with the excluded person. Really quickly touches on who to screen. That includes contracted individuals and entities. Number 3, no federal health care program or payment can be made for any items or services furnished at the medical direction of an excluded person or on the prescription of an excluded person. So the umbrella being here, anyone excluded or associated with exclusions is also going to fall into this. Reimbursement for items or services must be repaid if that is found to be the case, and CMPs are also tacked onto that. That base penalty is the next slide, actually. And just an additional batch of prohibition of excluded party participation is also seen here on the right. Who to screen and when? The regulatory requirements, government expectations. We use the rule of thumb, anyone you pay. Any direct staff, any indirectly paid individuals or entities that are only applicable if they are hired in the provision of healthcare. For example, your sandwich shop is really not going to apply. For the entities, their identifier is really going to be you pay them, and also they can receive federal funding as well. So any person or entity paid directly or indirectly, it does include ownership and control interest. And CMS Open Payments does include that in their database too. If you ever want to get a quick view as to who has ownership and control interest, at a minimum, you've got to screen the LEIE. The standard of screening has grown, however, multiple federal and state agencies have come under that umbrella. Industry expansion is also covered, by the way, in the latest OIG compliance program guidance that was released in November. And HHS guidance also includes the SAM. You just can't go wrong with that. LEIE and SAM, always at a minimum. The master death file, I've seen it added here and there. It's not applicable. It's handy, but it's not applicable. Business associates should be screened. There's a small catch to that because you're not going to have the PII necessary to investigate those matches. So in those cases, that's where your business associate agreements become kind of critical. Use that to limit the liability. When to screen, just straightforwardly, anytime you're going to do a new hire, monthly for ongoing staff and entities, but always pre-hiring. The civil monetary penalties, adjusted for inflation for 2023. The 2024 inflation hasn't come out yet. It's typically around October, November for that. But simply for employing the excluded individual, it's going to be $24,163 as a base. And then penalties of up to $20,000 for each falsely claimed item or service, which would be defined as anything billed through federal billing where that person was associated or employed. There's a quick overview of the federal list and a quick overview of the state list that exists. The only two states without lists are Wisconsin and Utah. A quick overview for establishing a process. And I know I'm running out of time, but this is the last slide that I will really go over. Step one, you've got to determine the list to screen. That previous slide really covered that. You've got your primary federal lists, the one the OIG, the two the OIG really say that you really need to review, but also add on things like DEA. If they're on the DEA list, the chances are very high that their DEA license was revoked for whatever reason. So script writing is going to become an issue. Perhaps not an actual exclusion, but it does fall under that umbrella for very important reasons. Step 2, you're going to determine your individuals and entities to screen. We've touched on this. Anyone you pay, anyone who is receiving remuneration directly or indirectly, including your contracted staff. Step 3, you got to determine your data resources and requirements. Pretty straightforwardly, HR is going to be your resource for this. Your PII is typically only your social security numbers or your dates of birth for staff. TIN is going to be the data you need. A little more difficult to get for your entities that are associated, but no less important. But the good point there as far as TIN is it's not required for probably 99% of false positives. Step 4, determining your individuals and parties responsible, your compliance office. But again, as I mentioned, HR is going to be the backup, if not the primary. For smaller practices, the office manager for sure. Step 5 is you're defining your screening process. Your third-party screening services are going to help define this for you. They basically involve collection of your data, determining who you're screening and what you're screening, and then whatever internal process they hand you. Typically, the simpler, the better. Very straightforwardly with, for example, with ours, OIG Express, it involves uploading your roster and you're done. Investigations are done in-house here, and you don't have to worry about that. And then step 6 is defining your reporting and documentation standards. Typically, straightforward with a smaller entity. For larger practices and organizations, that's going to be everything from board involvement on down to additional departmental involvement. A few recent enforcement examples. This is only here to prove that this is very common. It happens all the time, and the fines are nothing to scoff at. People, you'll notice a lot of times the wording, and if you click into any of these on the OIG site, the wording says they employed, the wording is always that they should have known. So the responsibility, the buck stops with you, basically. The responsibility is always on the employing agency, so be sure to just keep that in mind. Of note, no trials ever needed. Each case is a settlement agreement. They've agreed to pay. I think I've gone over on time a little bit, my apologies. But if there are ever any questions, if anybody would like to, feel free to reach out. Give me a call, talk about compliance programs in general, specifically OIG compliance. Ask me any questions. I get them all the time, and I'm happy to have a talk with anybody who wants to chew on it. So I appreciate your time today, and we also have your code there for 2 free months of OIG Express. Indy Protect is your code. Very quick to add to get started. So again, thank you for your time, and I will go ahead and hand off control.
Thank you, Stephen. That was excellent. And while you're still on, how practical is it for a small practice to do this on their own, in your experience?
You know, right off the bat, my question has to basically, I kind of shoot back is how small are we talking? If you're screening 5 people, that still is on a monthly basis going to require you, if you're doing it manually, to screen upwards of 70 state and federal agencies for 5 separate people. At the very least, you need a portal with a third party just to enter those names in and see what sticks. Month to month, those names of 5 people, for example, in this case, it probably won't change. But again, you have to maintain that monthly record.
I understand. And 5 people, of course, would be like a solo